Vladimir Putin has given a speech today in which he declares that all of his goals will be set, and he gives a lot of justification for why he thinks that way. We've been talking about the progress of the war going on for quite a long time now, especially in the recent months. It's been going downhill. The Zelensky's visit to the United States to try to get approval for long-range missiles and his speech at the UN General Assembly basically got nothing for him. So these comments coming by Putin now take on increasing urgency, especially as the risk of the U.S. getting sucked into that war grows. And we also have other breaking news in another part of the world where the U.S. could also get sucked into a war in the Middle East, with either a looming or, in some reports, already started ground invasion by Israel into their northern border into southern Lebanon. We're going to unpack all this for you today. Lots of things going on, lots of moving parts, and we need somebody like Larry Johnson to help us understand exactly what's going on. Former CIA officer and author of the Sonar21.com website. Larry, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much, Danny. Fun to be with you.
Well, let's just jump right into it. Let's just hit these topics first of all in order with Russia. So Zelensky had gone to Washington to try and both give a victory plan and tell everybody how he's actually going to change the fortunes of everything, and he wants long-range weapons and he wants all these commitments. And he left Washington D.C. with lots of pats on the back and big speeches, but nothing in his pocket to get back with. How do you see this? How do you see his mission to the Washington?
Well, in the course of his mission to Washington, he got Russia to change its policy with respect to nuclear weapons. Russia's new policy. So they talked about it last week, and they're moving it through the decision-making process. But my understanding is it's now been signed as a decree that if the United States, a nuclear power, gives Ukraine any weapons, not nuclear weapons, but any weapons that are used to attack inside Russian territory, that Russia will view that as a potential nuclear attack and will respond. So that's what Zelensky's achieved. A shift in the policy, because previously the West has been supplying. So UK is a nuclear power. The United States is a nuclear power. My understanding, France is a nuclear power. And they've all been supplying weapons to Ukraine, and Ukraine has been using those to attack inside Russia. And up to this point, Russia has not treated that as really an act of war. What this new policy means is it will be treated as an act of war going forward. That's what we're looking at. If the West continues to enable and facilitate Ukraine's attacks inside Russian territory.
Now, after he got back, Zelensky, without anything in pocket, has not changed his ideas about fighting. He's continuing to lose ground in the Kursk incursion that they had. He's continuing to lose ground even more rapidly now in the Eastern Front, especially near Vuhledar, and now even Stolitova is showing some more signs of dropping today. Russians moving further to the west. And so Zelensky went on, I think this was yesterday, where he said, hey, I need a few more things, West. Watch this.
Every day, Russia uses about 100 guided aerial bombs against Ukraine. And this is a constant reminder to all our partners who can help that we need more long-range capabilities for Ukraine. We need more air defense for Ukraine. We need more sanctions against Russia. During our various talks in America, our position and arguments have been heard in as much detail as possible, so that there are no more questions.
Yeah, but there is a question, because his detailed plan was in fact heard. Everybody here heard the things that he listened there, but he just mentioned there correctly that they're suffering over 100 airstrikes per day, 100 of these glide bombs. And of course, you know that some of these are quite large and extremely destructive. And that's one of the primary reasons for this incursion from the Eastern Front back to the West, because they're having more success along with everything else they have. And one would rationally say, if you left empty-handed from Washington, what reason and rationale do you think that you're going to have after you've come back to ask for long-range weapons, more air defense, and then newer sanctions that you didn't get when you were there in person. What's the logic behind this?
Well, there is no logic. And, I've jokingly thought that he should have listened to the music that was playing in the White House in the background. It was that Peggy Lee song. Is that all there is? Because that's essentially what the Western officials are saying if they heard Zelensky's peace plan. Is that all there is? And not only is he lacking in the details, but the UK just admitted it's empty. It doesn't have any more weapons to give. So we got the magical world where you think that, well, okay, the United States has unlimited stockpiles. Our inventory is way up. We can just give it away. Huh. Those days are over. And no matter what we give Ukraine, you get into the issues of, do they have personnel trained to use it? No. Do they have personnel trained to maintain it? No. Do they actually have personnel? No, they're short on that too. So, Zelensky's trying to buy time. I don't know for what though.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Buy time for what? Because I also saw a report over this past weekend that some of the Ukrainian ground forces commanders are complaining about the mobilization because they said, listen, you get out of every 100 people that are mobilized, 30 of them disappear before they ever leave the training situation. Right. Another 30 of them disappear on the trip when they're getting deployed after they finish their training. And then he said, and of those that arrive here, 20 refuse to fight. So he said 10 out of every 100 actually fight, and most of those are actually dying. So when you look at those numbers, and let's just assume that he's exaggerating, although I don't know why, because he's the one that's needing them. But those numbers, no matter what they actually are terrible for anything going forward to the manpower issue you just described.
Yeah, even if the Ukrainians wanted to lie about this and try to flip it around like they do and say, oh, that's what Russia's facing. We're not having any problems at all. People are beating our doors down to join up, but they're not. And I know you had that conversation with Mr. Barndollar the other day, and it's a stalemate. Oh, Russia's suffering. I don't know. He's lying. That's the only way I can describe it. It's not that he's misinformed. He's absolutely lying about the situation. Even the Financial Times of London, which I think is the article you were referencing, or if you weren't, it's just another one that adds to it, are talking about the massive losses that the Ukrainians are suffering. And it's something you and I have talked about extensively. Because they're not trained. That's one of the major factors contributing to the deaths of newly arrived personnel on the battlefield. They haven't been trained. And there's some training that you can only get through experience. That's true. But at least if you're given, you've had 6 months to absorb how you're supposed to behave in a military unit and under stressful conditions, they're not even getting that. So this, we're going to see this convergence as the winter weather rolls in, as right now the Rasputitsa, this rain-soaked ground that would develop and turns it into bogs and quagmires. The Ukrainian situation is going to become more dire because one of the consequences with the Rasputitsa is the inability to provide resupplies. Up to this point in the past, the Ukrainians were able to rely on railroads to ferry a lot of their logistics forward. But with the problems, Pokrovsk has been cut off effectively, and it was a major railway junction. It's no longer able to serve that purpose. So all the points south and north of Pokrovsk are going to be hurting. And that means they're not going to have food. They're not going to have ammunition. The failure to continue to resupply when they're coming up against Russian units, which now control those railroad lines, which now are able to actually, rain or no rain, to continue to move their forces forward. This is not, nobody can sit down and construct let me lay out a happy, sunny scenario where Ukraine is going to, the sun's going to rise, the birds will sing, angels will rejoice, and they will turn the Russians back. Ain't going to happen.
And you know, Larry, I want to tag on to something you said there, because it is, I think, more important than a lot of people recognize, and that is the training issue. Even in the United States Army, if you bring in somebody, you know, who goes into our system, say for a leg infantryman or a Marine Corps, you know, infantry fighter, those guys are going to get about 5 months of training. And then once they finish that, they go on advanced individual training or some version thereof. And then when they arrive, they are ready now to pick up a rifle and to do the minimal job necessary. But in order to have an effective unit, I don't have to tell you this, but this is for the benefit of our folks here. You have to have years really of training so that the unit, and even in an emergency situation, you'd have to have a year to be able to train units how to fight cohesive with an organization. And there's zero of that. They don't even have the pretense. We showed a video a month or so ago by the General Sersky, who said they hope, or they'd like to get at least a month of training before the guys come up. And that's all that can do is just provide leg infantrymen, and that's it. No capacity to do anything else. And there's none on the horizon. So there's, again, to your point, there's no path to where this is going to change anytime soon.
Speaking of the training, of course, everyone wants the level of training to be the best. So we train highly qualified professional military personnel. At the same time, the dynamics at the front require us to put conscripted servicemen into service as soon as possible. That is why we conduct a compulsory basic military training for at least a month, and qualified training, which is at least 2 weeks a month.
I don't know if you saw, but Christian Amanpour's face there, I was like, she looked like she really understood what that meant when he's saying, holy crap, that's all you're going to get? There's no path there.
Well, and let's talk about with firearms in particular, rifles. So anybody that's ever gone to a gun range, whether you're by yourself, you're in a single lane, hopefully you may have ballistic walls on either side of you, so you don't have to worry about the people next to you shooting you. But when you're in the military and you've got 15 guys, or let's say 30 guys, and maybe there's a woman or two tossed in, and they're all carrying loaded rifles, and you're having to move as a unit. Well, one, you have to develop the basic discipline so you're not like Alec Baldwin, where you put your finger on the trigger and you shoot somebody you're not supposed to, number one. You then learn that you keep it in a safe direction until you're pointing it at whoever you tend to kill. But all of a sudden, if you got three of you in a line and there's a threat over here to the left, it takes some training to teach you that you don't automatically swing and put that muzzle right in the back of the head of your buddy next to you, because then he won't be your buddy much longer. He'll be dead. So that doesn't come natural. That's something that has to be drilled over and over and over. And usually a very kind, gentle drill instructor there to remind people about the proper efficacy and right way to use a firearm. You get called a few names and, you'll be lit up. But that takes time. And all of a sudden, they're giving these guys, here's a rifle. Good luck. They may not even know how to disassemble it for starters. They may not even know how to clear a malfunction if they press the trigger and nothing happens. So, and then all of a sudden they're going up against Russian units that have had a minimum, from what I've seen, 10 months training. They've gone through basic training, or they've been reservists, they've come back to refresher, but then they go through unit training. And the unit training is lasting, 4 to 6 months in length. Now, that doesn't mean when they show up, they're perfect. But by God, they do have an idea of what they're supposed to do and what they're not supposed to do.
In comparison, right. And so when you put all this together that we've seen so far about what Zelensky didn't get when he was here at the United Nations, had everybody physically in one place where he could talk to them, left empty-handed. Right now, he's admitting that they're suffering 100 airstrikes a day across the area. They don't have enough air defense missiles. We've shown previously that Jake Sullivan said that we don't have any more air defense missiles to give him than what we're already doing. So there's just no more to give him. In light of all that, we should say, okay, again, it's time to change course here, something that has a chance to have any kind of success and have a negotiated settlement. But we're not doing that. Instead, we're continuing with the fiction. We can just keep going on. But Russia is not sitting passively by. This statement here, released by Colonel McGregor earlier, talks about what could be a looming Russian attack.
There's a lot of evidence that there's a buildup for a major Russian ground offensive, as well as more missile offensives that we've seen in recent days. It's very important that people note that. We're on the threshold of something really big coming out of Russia in Ukraine. I think the Russians have finally decided they've let this war drag on too long. And I think they've decided they've wasted time waiting for someone with common sense to negotiate. So I think they're going to set the terms of battle and ultimately the terms of victory. I think that's what we're going to witness now in October, November.
Do you see any evidence of that the Russia is going to try and set the terms of victory and do something about it?
I have seen the significant upkick in the number of Kinzhals and other hypersonic missiles being used against critical spots and locations in Ukraine. You know, I really think the murder of Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon the other day is actually playing a factor in Russian decision-making with respect to what's going on in Ukraine. And people go, well, what are you talking about, Johnson? Well, let me explain. The Russians have been victims of lies of the United States and of Europe. Minsk I and Minsk II are two clear examples of that. And they've been firsthand victims, if you will. They thought they had negotiated a peace agreement, a settlement to bring this war to an end back, 2.5 years ago in March of 2022, sabotaged by the West. Well, the Russians have been working closely with the Iranians, and apparently after the assassination of Hania, when Iran was vowing to retaliate, the United States and Europe intervened, and I'm sure they talked to Russia in the process, but intervened with the Iranians and said, look, if you don't retaliate, if you keep your powder dry, we're going to lift the sanctions, we're going to bring you back into the fold of nations, we're going to help your economy, and we'll get everything back on running in normal order. And the Iranians were dumb enough to believe it. Now, that's not me speculating on that. That's what President Pezeshkian said last night, the Iranian president, that he'd been lied to. So if you're looking at it from Russia's standpoint, you now realize you can't trust a single thing that comes out of Washington at all. There is no honor. There is no honoring one's word. There's no commitment that can be given that they'll keep. And as a result, you've got to assume you're going to have to attack. Plus, there's the Russians are getting the same kind of pressure that's now on the Iranians, which, you've been too patient, you've been too kind, you've been too cautious. You now need to take the gloves off and beat the hell out of them. And that's where we're headed. So, yeah, I think Doug's right. But when you look at this entire offensive that's underway right now in the Donbass, you could, go back a year and a half ago. A year and a half ago, people would be focused on the daily update from Bakhmut. It was just Bakhmut. Everything else on the line was basically quiet. There wasn't a lot of activity. There was just one place at broad line of contact that the activity was. It's not the case now. There are 10 different locations where that same level of activity is underway. And so from being the kid with trying to stop the single leak in the dike, all of a sudden, man, you got 20 leaks. Which one do you plug first? And even if you plug that, the others are going to break through. You can't stop. We are reaching what I guess Clausewitz called it that culmination point, where it's going to overwhelm what the Ukrainian defenses can do to stop the Russians.
And so let's see what the other side of that equation looks like. So you saw McGregor say, well, I see some signs that show something big's coming in. I've made the same comment here that a number of things I've seen about the location of troops, where they have been sent, lots of train loads of military equipment going to areas that haven't yet gone to the front, so they could be staging for something pretty big. We'll see. But then on top of all that, we have this new comment by Vladimir Putin today, who is claiming that they are going to set the terms of, well, no, I'm sorry, that was Doug's call. He's going to reach a settlement and bring this SMO to a successful conclusion. He said a number of things, and I'm going to start off. This is kind of a long clip. We're going to kind of start and stop it here and get your comments on a couple of things. But here's the first thing that Putin said.
Знали, в каких невыносимых условиях постоянных обстрелов, блокады, долгих 8 лет жил Донбасс. Каким притеснением подвергались жители Новороссии. Они выступили против вооруженного государственного переворота в Киеве. Дали отпор неонацистской диктатуре, которая хотела навсегда оторвать их от исторической родины, от России. Мы не были братьев и сестер. Пытались достичь мирного разрешения тяжелейшего конфликта.
Gary, if you could stop it right there. So that's the first place. So he's starting off by saying, this is today, by the way. He starts off by saying, hey, we came into the defense of our brothers in the Donbass area, etc. And then he says, hey, and we thought we had a negotiated settlement with the West, but then that turned out to be not true. So I wonder, Larry, if you can first of all talk about, and again, we're not saying anything's right or wrong from anybody's perspective, but we do need to say this is the Russian perspective on things. How does Putin see that aspect of it?
Yeah, this has been an evolution for the Russians. Some, at least Putin's critics in Moscow in particular, claimed that he was naive, he was bamboozled, he was entirely too trusting of the West. And Putin, in some of his remarks in the past, has actually sort of conceded that, yeah, maybe he was too trusting of the West, but he genuinely wanted to seek a peaceful solution to this. You know, Russia, under different leadership in after the Maidan in 2014, could have used that as a pretext for activating their military and launching a full-scale invasion back then. Now, they probably were not militarily ready to do so then. But it was still Western aggression, and then the subsequent attacks by the Ukrainian military against the Russian-speaking citizens in Donetsk and Luhansk could have been ample justification for that kind of response, but they didn't do it. And they waited. They did help shore up the militias in both Luhansk and Donetsk, and they withstood, sort of fought the Ukrainians to a standstill for 8 years until 2022. But then I think the Russians were picking up intelligence that the Ukrainians were actually going to make a move, a new offensive, backed by NATO, because all of this was ultimately going after the policy that's pursued by the United States with the support of NATO to break up and destroy Russia, to break it into component parts so that the West can basically take its resources and consume it, like ravenous locusts is probably the best way to think of it.
Okay, well, that's what he had up till, I guess that was actually April of 2022. Then he continues on.
Вы знаете, чем закончились эти переговоры? Ложью, подлогом и обманом.
There's the lies you're talking about there, Larry.
Которые за это время превратили Украину в свою колонию, в военный плацдарм, нацеленный на Россию. Они планомерно насаждали ненависть и радикальный национализм, разжигали вражду ко всему русскому, поставляли оружие, направляли наемников и советников, готовили украинскую армию к новой войне, чтобы опять, как весной и летом 2014 года...
And is that the part where he's talking about right there, where he says, yeah, they prepared the Ukrainian army for a new war in order to carry out a punitive action? So that's what you're saying he saw prior to, I guess, the opening in February of 2022.
Well, no, actually, I think there he's talking about the counteroffensive of June 2023.
Okay, so he's moved on from that. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's what he's referring to, because it was, it was prepared with the full, with NATO planners, which, that goes back to what a lot of these U.S. military pundits, all these retired generals said that, on the one hand, oh yeah, they would have succeeded, would have rolled all the way to Crimea, but at the same time, the U.S. planners failed to even follow our own doctrine. Because part of our own doctrine is, okay, if you're going to launch this kind of offensive, you better damn well sure you've got some air power and that you actually have the control of the air, at least air superiority. If not, you're going to be, you're going to run into some real inabilities to carry operation. Well, duh. Guess what happened? They failed.
Yeah, we didn't have it.
Then Petraeus and Hodges and all going, gee, how did that happen? It's got, did you guys sleep through your time at West Point and, Command General Staff College? I mean, were you playing video games? It's just ridiculous.
One would wonder. Okay, so let's continue on with that. Gary, hit the play.
Устроить карательную акцию на юго-востоке. В качестве целей были намечены не только Донбасс, но и Крым, и другие российские регионы. Дальнейшее развитие событий полностью подтвердило необходимость и обоснованность специальной военной операции, ее поистине освободительный характер.
So he's saying up to that point that all the foregoing and all the things that had happened prior there, in his view, completely justifies the special military operation, as they call it, and then going forward there. So in the next speech, we're going to look here in a second about what he said they're going to do that going forward. But up to this point, he's saying he's justified. Is this just somebody saying, hey, we did this because we wanted to, and I'm just looking for some justification, or has he got any valid points?
Vladimir Putin is not Bill Clinton, okay? Bill Clinton was a notorious and talented, very talented bullshit artist. I mean, man, he could charm people that didn't like him. When they'd meet him, would come away going, God, he's a great man. I heard John Kiriakou.
Some of those, by the way, who did that, who hated him before they met him the first time, and then just got starstruck. So I can validate that's true.
Yeah, I heard John Kiriakou tell this one of the Greek fundraisers, Greek Americans, a big fundraiser, and after the revelations of the Monica Lewinsky business came out, all the fundraisers got together and said, we're going to confront him and we're going to tell him he has to resign. And so they got in the meeting, they're all looking for bear, and then poorly Clinton comes in and he goes, oh, I'm sorry, I betrayed you, and I'm
pretty
hard. Good. And he went through it. and by the end, all the guys were crying and they're going, Clinton, Clinton, okay? That's not Vladimir Putin. Putin doesn't bring any of that, razzmatazz to the table. He's tight-jawed. He says what he means what he says. And so he's not embellishing, he's not hyping the thing. And that's why Americans, we're accustomed to the Bill Clinton style. I mean, we got a little bit of it with Obama. Obama was not nearly as talented as Clinton at it. But that's what we're accustomed to. And so here we're seeing something that we're really not used to seeing in Vladimir Putin.
And so let's see what he does mean there. So that's what he said up to this point. But now let's see, what has he got going forward? He said this.
Хочу обратиться сейчас к жителям Донецкой Народной Республики, Луганской Народной Республики, Запорожской и Херсонской областей. Сегодня все вместе мы отстаиваем безопасное, благополучное будущее для наших детей и внуков. Нашу общую судьбу, память о достижениях и победах великих предков. Верность их традициям и заветам. Эти чувства дают силы участникам специальной военной операции. Сражаясь сейчас в Донбассе и в Новороссии, отстаивая Курские, Белгородские, Брянские рубежи, они защищают всю огромную, прекрасную, любимую нами Россию. Правда, на нашей стороне. Все намеченные цели будут достигнуты.
He goes to a link there to tie in all of the Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia, all of the regions that have been annexed into Russia, with Crimea, and then to Bryansk, to Belgorod, to the Kursk, and all those. So he ties the existing Russia, pre-existing Russia,
Right.
into all the new ones and saying they're all Russians, and then says together we're going to accomplish all the goals of the SMO. So when he says that, what do you think he means by those goals?
So this predates even the Soviet Union, the formation in the start of the Russian Revolution, 1917. Donbass is the heart of Russia. So that even though the Donbass was considered part of Ukraine, it has long been in place that Donbass is considered the heart of Russia. And yet, think about this. In March of 2022, the Russians were willing to cede Donetsk and Luhansk to Ukraine. They could keep it as long as Ukraine committed not to join NATO and agreed to respect the rights of the Russian speakers.
Yeah.
So they said, we'll relinquish claim. Well, then they were betrayed. And then after the elections in Zaporizhia and Kherson, in addition to Donetsk and Luhansk, all four voted majority, and the elections were observed by international observers, just not people from the West that that would help us steal elections. But all four republics voted to realign, to rejoin Russia. So that was September of 2022. So since then, as far as Russia is concerned, they're no longer on the table to be given back. That phase of the negotiations gone. In fact, Putin's last proposal to Ukraine was basically get your butts out of Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donetsk, and Luhansk. Get out.
Right. Yeah, I remember back in
Stop
June.
your military operations. Then we'll talk. You're in Russia right now. We're not going to allow you to stay in Russia. Yeah, so he's not turning back and saying, oh, it's just temporarily part of Russia. No, they view it historically as part of Russia because, a lot of this is of recent vintage, that area was part of Russia until Nikita Khrushchev back in the 1950s, who was Ukrainian by birth, decided, hey, we're going to gift it back. Ukraine, you get to be, your own separate thing now. So, what's really ironic, if you go back and look at all of the leaders of both the Soviet Union and then into Russia, Putin's actually the first real Russian to rule it. Stalin, he's from Georgia. And I don't mean Atlanta, Georgia, okay? Yeah. But, he's from Georgia. Khrushchev and Brezhnev were both out of Ukraine. So, but the point is, now you've got a real Russian from real Russian heritage telling you exactly as it is. This ain't going back.
What is that going to mean? Because I mean, you saw here McGregor says he thinks something's big is coming. Others have said no, they're just going to stay with this slow grind. But regardless of which it is, what is going to be the objective now? How far will they go, and how will this end?
Unconditional surrender by Ukraine. It'll be a military surrender. The army will be disbanded. They're not going to be allowed to remain intact, and they'll be compelled to force all NATO personnel out of the country. And if NATO forces dare to intervene, Russia will hit them. I mean, it's going to be, they're not going to play now from this point on, because again, I think the murder of Nasrallah, that's not just isolated to the Middle East. That resonates up in Russia. It's had an effect in Russia because they're sitting there looking, going, these damn Westerners, you can't trust a word they say. They are murderers. They blame us for killing women and children when they are killing 10 times the number of women and children. They're supplying the bombs to do it, and they don't care. They don't care.
And so how long might that take, and how long would Russia be willing? Because at least if you look at the rate of advance in the West or on the Eastern Front, even though it's been a lot faster, it's still relatively small. I mean, this could potentially go on for quite a while, do you think?
No, I don't think it'd go on beyond next spring at the latest. I think, in fact, it may not even last through December, simply because of the breakdown in the logistics. So once Pakrovsk falls, there's nothing between it and the Dnieper River, and taking and then that puts Zaporizhia really in play. And the Russians haven't waited to start; they've already started on the attacks there. So then that leaves Kherson. And it leaves also, you've got a significant Russian military presence in Belarus. They may decide to just
So you're
go
saying
ahead
that
and
whether
sweep
there's a
down.
big arrow movement, as Doug and as I have speculated may come, or whether it's just a continued of the death by 1,000 cuts, the same net is the end result is the same.
Right.
That right now, the negotiated settlement doesn't appear to be on the table, but just methodically moving to a military victory. That's what it looks like that they're seeking.
Yeah, this is, if whatever we call a negotiated, it'll be akin to the negotiated settlement that negotiated the Nazis' end of World War II, where it was an unconditional surrender. They didn't get to come in and say, hey, can we keep our guns? Can we still fly the blue and yellow flag? It's not going to be that kind of negotiation. So the Russians are going to call the shots on this. I think. Again, we've mistaken patience for weakness and foolishness, but there comes a point when you exhaust that patience that they'll push back, and our problem is we're not even in a position to push back. I mean, across the board, we don't have the production to supply, pick your weapon system.
Yeah.
So and then. We're getting ourselves embroiled in other conflicts. We proved in 2003 that we are not capable of fighting a two-front war. Because in fact that's what got me fired as a Fox News analyst. I was a Fox News analyst in November of 2002, and I was on the Hannity and Combs show, and I was asked a specific question about invading Iraq, and I said, look. We're not in a position to fight a two-front war. We need to stay focused on dealing with this so-called global war on terrorism and getting rid of bin Laden. Roger Ailes sent word down the next day that I was no longer to be allowed to go on air.
Wow.
I was spreading disinformation.